It's Sunday afternoon after week one. I've gotten done reading through all the comments and discussion posts that people have made this week, and I want to thank everybody who contributed. This was really a terrific amount of information that was shared, a lot of great ideas. A lot of the students really hit on what I think as some of the real key takeaways from these discussions, and I encourage you to keep participating to the extent you did. Those of you who were maybe less active than others, you'll want to step up your game just a little bit. The rest of you keep up the great work that you did. I wanted to touch on kind of one key insight in particular that I want you to remember from week one, and that's the idea of the value of corporate information. One of your students, Lauren, had some great insight when she talked about as shareholders, we don't control the management decisions, right? In fact, the real key tenet of corporate business structure is the idea of the separation between management and ownership, or control and ownership. Managers are making decisions and they have access to the best information, and as shareholders, we don't have intrinsically access to that information. So we have to look to management to share it with us. That can be very costly, both in terms of the administrative costs and in terms sometimes of the honesty and the ego and the willingness of management to share information. But I hope to show later that it's critical to how well a capital market really operates. So one of the first assignments I have you do, which you should be working on this week, is actually listening to an earnings call from a company of your choice. I gave you a list of a whole bunch of sort of live calls this week, but it's just as easy to pick a company that you like and go back and find one of their previous calls. Do it in conjunction with reading the press release of their most recent quarterly earnings. That's the real role of an analyst. And I'm not looking for you guys to become analysts, but what you're doing when you're creating valuation is really looking through and parsing the information that management has presented to you to decide how valuable the quality of the earnings that they are reporting. One option that shareholders always have is the ability to vote with your feet. If you decide that the company is not providing valuable information or is going in a direction that you don't like, you always have the option of selling your shares and simply moving on and reinvesting in another entity somewhere else. In essence, by that, what you're really saying is that you don't believe, based upon the information you're getting from management, you don't believe that management is really creating value, right? Their goal should be to maximize shareholder value, but rather management may be destroying value or at least not creating as much value as you believe they should. So one of the interesting things to take out of this is whether or not there is value created by listing on and being traded on the American capital markets. Obviously, most American companies list on either the New York Stock Exchange or NASDAQ. A significant amount of foreign companies do so as well. There's a lot of discussion in the Saudi Aramco discussion forum about the transparency that the Saudi Arabian kingdom might not be willing to share if they do an IPO on Aramco. If they decide to list that on the New York Stock Exchange, they'll be forced to create a great deal of transparency. And so the real question becomes, is value created by listing and being subject to the transparency that is inherent in U.S. financial markets? There's a couple slides that I've put in one of the presentations that I posted that I think really highlight that. So this slide really gets at that last point I was trying to make. I found this in some research recently and really wanted to highlight what the what it shows. And what it does is it compares the size of these different world stock markets. Take a look from 1900 to 2016. So take a look, right? In 1900, the USA was about 15% of the total world stock markets. And today, more or less, let's call it January 2016, we're now 52%. Tremendous growth in US stock markets. Part of it is driven obviously by the economic success and the fact that we, won or at least didn't lose to world wars. Consider Germany, who went from 13% and Austria at 5%, down to, I don't think here, in Italy about 2.1%, down to where Germany now is only 3% of world markets, and Italy and Austria don't even show up. Japan's kind of a special case. They almost didn't exist in 1900 economically, and then their recovery from the war effort really led them to grow phenomenally. But the question is, or the point I like to get from this is, was this success in the growth of our markets only based upon the economic success that USA had, or was a lot of it driven by the regulatory environment in the United States relative to some of these others? Because after the Depression, really, and with the regulation, with the enactment of legislation like the or the Securities and Exchange Act and the Investment Advisors Act in the 30s, and those mandates on information transparency and transparent information flow to investors, how much did that transparency contribute to the fact that the USA became a tremendous place for companies to raise capital? It became much less costly because investors didn't have to worry about not knowing what they were investing in. The second, if I can get it to go, just shows this picture in another way. This is in 2015. Look at the capitalization of the New York Stock Exchange and NASDAQ, right? A total of over 24, I think that's trillions of dollars, as compared to many of these other exchanges. The vast bulk of the capitalization of companies are traded on U.S. exchanges. And again, how much of that can we attribute to the regulation and the transparency of information inherent in the United States capital markets? So where does that leave us? When you think about the cost, when you think about the time and effort that companies go into in making financial statements available quarterly, producing those earnings releases, being subject to independent audits, being subject to questioning on these earnings calls by sometimes antagonistic analysts who want to know why a company's stock is not doing so well. All of those costs are offset, in my opinion at least, by the benefit, the value creation that is available to U.S. companies because of the regulatory environment and the transparency of information that is required here. And that value, I'm sure there are probably researchers who have found a way to put a number on it. But when you consider the success of the U.S. capital markets over the last 50 to 70 years, a lot of it, I think, can be traced to that full and clear and independent transparency that is required in our capital markets.